They told you college was the start of everything, a smart move, a life hack, a golden ticket that would buy you freedom, success, purpose. Just work hard, make the grades, go to class, graduate, and boom, life would open its arms to you. But what if that promise was never real? What if the thing that was sold to you as the key to your future was actually the first chain around your ankle? Because for most people, what waits after graduation isn't opportunity. It's debt. Not a little, not manageable. A tidal wave, 1.77 trillion in student loans, more than all credit cards and car loans combined. This wasn't a glitch. This was always the plan. Right now, the average young adult in the US leaves college with around $38,000 in personal debt. Some carry it longer than their marriages. Some pay it off at 45. By then, half their life is gone. This was supposed to be the beginning. But let's be real, it feels more like a sentence. You traded your best years for lectures, 4 years, sometimes more, spent chasing a dream someone else sold you. But who sold it to you, and why? They never told you student loans are one of the only debts you can't shake through bankruptcy, that the interest builds, even while you sleep, that if you die, your family might still be on the hook. They didn't tell you that. They just slapped a bow on it and called it opportunity. But let's call it what it really is, indentured servitude with better marketing. They said college would set you free. But how can you be free when every decision in your adult life, where you live, what job you take, whether you start a family, is filtered through one question? Can I make my loan payment this month? And that's not even the worst part. They didn't just take your money, they took your agency. They handed you a script and called it destiny. Grow up, follow the steps, be responsible. And most of us listened because we thought we were doing the right thing. You were told college would make you valuable, but no one stopped to ask what you value. And now, here you are, maybe 25, maybe 35, maybe 50, still paying for something you never really needed, still wondering, was it worth it? Did I choose this? Or was I just next in line? Because not all prisons have bars. Some are made of contracts, interest rates, shame, silence. Carl Rogers, the psychologist who spent his life helping people reconnect with who they really are, once said, "The only person who is educated is the one who has learned how to learn and change." But how do you change when the very first system you trusted was built to keep you the same? Let's talk about what they don't put in the brochures, not during campus tours, not in graduation speeches. By the time you hit the real world, you're already carrying weight you never fully agreed to. And that weight, disguised as opportunity, starts to crush something far more important than your credit score. It crushes your direction, your spark, your belief that starting over is even allowed. So ask yourself, if this is the beginning, why does it already feel like the end? But here's the truth. The worst kind of debt isn't financial. It's existential. It's waking up in a life that doesn't feel like yours. It's playing a role you never chose. It's smiling through a job that drains you because at least it pays the bills. It's hearing someone say, "You're doing great," and wondering if they're talking to the mask you wear, not the person you are. Carl Rogers called this incongruence, the emotional pain that comes from living a life on the outside that doesn't match who you are on the inside. It's real, and it's everywhere. A generation was told to chase success, but never taught to define it for themselves. So they went to college, not from confidence, but from fear. Fear of falling behind, fear of letting their parents down, fear of saying, "I don't know what I want yet." Instead of space to figure it out, they were given a script, a path, a default life setting. They followed it because everyone else was. Because doing something felt safer than doing nothing. But that one scared decision can shape the next 20 years. And what are we seeing now? According to CNBC and Strata Education, 1 in 3 Americans regret going to college. Nearly 70% of students picked the wrong major. This isn't a fluke. This is mass misguidance, marketed as wisdom. We've trained people to conform, but we never taught them to connect with themselves. We gave them debt but no direction, and now we wonder why everyone's anxious, unmotivated, burned out, even the ones who look successful, because success in the wrong life is still suffering. You can have the house, the title, the 401k, and still feel like a stranger to your own soul. That's not burnout, that's identity collapse. It's the pressure of living a life you didn't design. And it starts early, in classrooms, at career fairs, in those guidance counselor meetings that feel more like pressure cookers than conversations. Pick something practical, don't waste time, secure your future. But, Rogers would ask, if your future is built on fear, is it really secure? Fear creates obedience, but obedience isn't purpose. And without purpose, even your wins feel like prisons. So, now we've got millions of people carrying two types of debt. The one with $1 signed the bank tracts, and the one no one talks about, the internal debt, the soul-level cost of living a life that was never yours to begin with. And what happens next? You adapt. You don't start that business, you don't switch careers, you don't move to the city that lights you up. Because every decision has to pass through this one suffocating filter. Can I still make my loan payment? So you stay. In the job that crushes your spirit, in the routine that flattens your fire, in the life that looks stable but feels like survival. And eventually, you stop dreaming. Not because you don't care, but because it hurts too much to imagine a life you don't believe you can afford. That's the real cage, the one Carl Rogers warned about. When your external obligations start rewriting your internal beliefs, you forget who you really are. You start to say things like, maybe this is just who I am. Maybe I was never meant for more. But that voice, that's not truth. That's trauma. That's survival logic disguised as wisdom. Because here's the truth. You were built to grow, to change, to evolve. But debt interrupts that. It turns curiosity into calculation. And worst of all, it convinces you that being safe is better than being alive. Let's talk about what debt really steals. Not just your money, your momentum, your willingness to try. According to Pew and NPR, 54% of young adults say student loans have delayed major life milestones: marriage, kids, new careers, dreams they once cared about. This isn't hesitation. This is theft. They're not lazy. They're not lost. They're surviving a system that was designed to chain them before they ever knew who they were. And over time, they learn to stop asking, stop hoping, stop reaching. Because eventually, if every mistake costs you 20 years, you stop believing you're allowed to make any. And that's how you lose yourself, not in one moment, but in hundreds of tiny compromises. You become obedient to a decision you made at 18, a decision you barely understood, and no one counts that cost. Because the system doesn't just sell education, it sells contracts, it sells identities, it sells futures built on fear. So here's the real question. If you start your adult life in chains, how could you ever believe you were meant to be free? You can't. So, you romanticize the chain. You call it responsibility. You call it just how the world works. But deep down, a quieter voice whispers, you could have lived differently. You still can. And that voice matters. Because Carl Rogers believed that people aren't broken. They're blocked. And what blocks them most is the belief that they no longer have permission to choose differently. But you do. Maybe you can't erase the debt, but you can stop letting it define what's possible. You can say, I made that choice out of fear, but my next one won't be. Because you weren't born to repay. You were born to become. Maybe you didn't take on student debt. Maybe you did, and you've paid it off. But still, you carry something. The weight of doing everything right. Picking the safe major, staying in the stable job, being the responsible one. And maybe it worked. You built the house. You held it all together. You followed the script. But now, in the quiet moments, something feels off. Like you've checked all the boxes. But you don't recognize the person doing the checking. That's not failure. That's incongruence. The space between who you are and who you were told to be. Carl Rogers warned about that. When we live for expectations instead of alignment, we lose touch with our truth. And maybe you're seeing it now in the people coming after you. Your kids, your students, young people making choices out of pressure, not passion, and your heart breaks because you know exactly how that story ends. You offer advice, trying to protect them, but protection can quietly become projection. You say, pick a stable path. You don't want to waste time. You need to be realistic. But deep down, you're just passing down the fear you never named. What if you didn't? What if you paused long enough to ask yourself, have I ever truly lived aligned with what matters most to me? Because sometimes the most courageous thing isn't starting over. It's telling the truth about the life you're already in. You don't need to burn everything down. You don't need to disappear into the woods. You just need to look in the mirror and ask, does this story still feel like mine? Because maybe the bravest thing you can do isn't to be perfect, but to be present, to live honestly, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. Carl Rogers once said, real suffering begins when we stop being ourselves and start performing someone else's version of us. And that, right there, is the real debt. Not the loan, not the interest. The life you built on top of fear and approval and pressure. But the good news, you don't owe that life anything. You can rewrite it. Maybe you're 20, maybe 60, maybe you're a parent, maybe you're still figuring out who you are. It doesn't matter. Because the permission to live your truth is always available. And your courage to claim it, that's what the next generation needs. Not advice, not warnings. Just one example of what it looks like to live from clarity instead of compliance. To say, this is me now, and I'm done pretending it's not. Because when you live that way, people feel it. Your kids feel it, your partner, your friends. You don't have to explain it, they'll see it. That's how we break the cycle. Not through lectures, through presence, not through force. Through example. Carl Rogers said, a fully functioning person is someone who's free to choose their own direction, because they're no longer afraid of being who they are. That's what we're all reaching for. Not perfection, not applause, just freedom. Freedom to stop performing. Freedom to stop carrying a story that isn't ours. Freedom to live a life that's real. And if that stirs something inside you, don't scroll past it. That's not anxiety. That's awakening. That's your inner life tapping on the door you closed a long time ago. Open it, even just a crack. Because when you live honestly, you begin to pay back a deeper kind of debt. The one you've owed to yourself for a very, very long time.